And so this is a really different broadcast, and it's not going to be a long one. But I think a few times now, people have asked me, how do you, and I've been doing this for a few years, how do you consume news? How do you know what to read? How do you know what to watch? How do you know what to follow? It's a really important question, because I think a lot of people are confused about, what is truth and what's really behind the headlines. So I thought I would just talk to you for a few minutes about it. You can throw out everything that I say. And that probably is one of the key things to reading news and listening to TV, is you have to do it with a skeptical eye and ear and mind. And if you don't like it, that's fine. But you should, if you're an open person, and I'm pretty open and wide-eyed about the world, I think that you should try to get a really good cross-section of news. So I personally like international news, and I'm a foreign correspondent. That's what I've done all my life. So obviously my focus when I read in the morning, because that's when I do most of my reading in and understanding of what's going on in the world, I focus on international news because I'm based in Europe. So my back door is London. And then from there, I look, across Europe through France and Germany and Spain. And then I read all sorts of different things. So it strikes me, a lot of people just have no idea what to follow. And the internet, really, if you're getting all your news from social media, is full of crap. And it's confusing. So here's a couple of things that I do. Maybe they'll help you out, maybe they won't. But the first thing I read in my morning is my email. And I subscribe to a few synopses. Well, first of all, I read the email from my mom, who lives in Canada, and see what she's up to. But then I read into my emails where I have the synopsis from a lot of major newspapers that I care about. Hi, Mark Goldman from Los Angeles. The Los Angeles newspapers are great, by the way. But I read the New York Times. I take a look at the synopsis of The Atlantic, which was had a big story this week about Donald Trump and how he didn't care about veterans when he made his trip to France in 2018. I listen to BBC News. I usually turn on television. I'm watching BBC News hourly. I watch Time. I read through the synopsis of Time, The Economist, the Financial Times, and The Guardian. And obviously, I don't read every single page of these newspapers, because who has time for that? Because I want to do this pretty quick in the morning. I want to go through in about an hour over my coffee, maybe 40 minutes, some days more, some days less, and just see what's cooking, what matters. And then after that, I may take a few stories and I may read in a bit more on the ones that I care about. So, I watch a couple of TV news programs, CNN for international news. I want to see what's happening politically in America. Since I'm in London, I don't get enough of that sometimes, so I'll turn on CNN. The BBC here for a lot of domestic news and political news. I watch ITV here in London, who has Piers Morgan, who used to host out of New York, and Piers is obnoxious and opinionated, but they have some good panel discussions, and they're really able to take apart a subject with usually a pretty good cross-section of people on there. So I get a cross-section of opinion. I want to know who's for it and who's against it and why they think that way. And I'm really open to listening to them. I think you shouldn't come to all these things with your head loaded, I'm for Donald Trump or I'm against Donald Trump, but I'm not going to listen to anybody else. Because if you're like that, then you shouldn't read anything at all. You can just sit in your echo chamber and you're not going to learn anything. Social media, pick your interests. And then you start to design and sculpt your social media in a positive way. So I care about Russia. I was based there as a correspondent for 12 years. So I care about what's going on there. And I'm often asked to comment about Russia and be an expert on Russian affairs. So I need to keep on top of that all the time. Belarus, that's a big event happening now. There's an uprising in Belarus. Lukashenko, the president, carried out fraudulent fake elections, and people are in the street every day. So I want to keep on top of Belarus. It's a developing, exciting story on the international scene. I look at the Baltics. I care about the Middle East. I used to live in Jerusalem, and I've been going back and forth to Israel many, many times as a journalist, and the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. So I want to stay afloat on that story, but I don't want to read in too much because often it's not moving. It's the same, and only when there's a major development, maybe I'll read in a bit more. And a lot of it's domestic politics right now. But follow a couple of people that you respect. And the Israeli conflict is a good example of how you can't follow one person, I think, because Israelis really come at this story. You're either for Israel or you're not, which I don't believe. I think there are a lot of different opinions about how Israel should be and could be. Palestinians are either supportive of Palestinians or you're not. And so that's a tricky story to navigate because you really have to read both sides and then try to understand and try to think with your bias in human rights, in democracy, and so you have to look at what's going on in that story and really read both sides and come away pretty skeptically when you're reading one or the other. I think I prefer print journalism for analysis, and I prefer broadcast journalism for breaking story, Mark Goldman is asking me. And I think, Mark, you understand news very well, so you probably have your own preferences. But breaking news, I'm going to go to Twitter. I'm going to go to TV and radio. Hello, Pablo. I'm going to go to TV and radio. Twitter's very good. I mean, you're just getting things unfiltered, unfettered, but you have to be very careful what you read because somebody's impression isn't necessarily fact, and it's usually within the first 10, 20, 30 minutes of a story, and people's impressions, just like, eyewitnesses on the sidewalk looking at a car accident, sometimes don't exactly see all of it. And so, but I was following the riots in Portland, for instance, and I follow them a lot because I've done a few stories on policing in America, the politicization of policing, and I hate that word, I can never say it right. So I watch a lot of stuff out of Portland, and there's certain guys that I've come to follow on Twitter a lot that are there every night, and they're always putting out material, and they're followed by a lot of people who give them videos. And so, if you start following a story, you come to get to know a lot of people on Twitter that maybe you're gonna follow because they tend to have the best video. I use a bit of Facebook. I don't think it's my favorite, but some of my friends are on there. A lot of my colleagues are on there, and they may be more open on Facebook with their friends than they might be openly. And I appreciate their perspective, and they're usually journalists that have been around a long time. That's my network. And so I like to look at Facebook. It is not my first go-to ever, but do I watch news on TV? I'm often on the news on TV, but that's my background. I'm a television person. So I think TV news is great. I watch the American networks. I think there's some great, CBS, ABC, NBC, the 3M nets, as we call them in our business, have some great reports, but they're very narrow, and they're going to tell you about America first, and they're always going to concentrate on what is rating and what is trending. And I think generally, if you want a more balanced view of the world, you have to look beyond the 3 American networks, but they're a pretty good start television-wise. Don't trust everything you read on social media. Think about who's writing it. Are they neutral? Don't get into a bunch of arguments on social media. I think it's useless time spent on politics, especially now. I mean, as you approach the U.S. election, I think you'll see a lot of nasty people, who have no room for anybody else's views. And I block them, or I just try not to read them, because I think there should be civilized political debate. Sorry, I'm Canadian, so we're pretty soft on politics, and it's not a blood sport in Canada. And I think there are people that will vote for a political party that I don't support, but I'll listen to their political views because I think that's really important, and I get some perspective from that. And I think that generally, if somebody wins an election, no matter what party in Canada, they have to take into account the people that didn't vote for them. And that doesn't seem to be an ongoing discussion in America right now, but it should be. And I think that when you're following people on social media, you should remind them of that, as some kind of civilized repartee, some civilized discussion. And you should be open to other people's views, because maybe you don't like their political party, but some of the things that they're talking about, you need to listen to. Podcasts, I like a few of them. I tend to like pretty factual podcasts, maybe podcasts that fill in a behind the scenes, how the New York Times got their story. I like the New York Times podcast, for instance. Backstory with Dana Lewis is a very good one. Give it a go. Sign up and subscribe. I think coming back to that morning time, that ritual, I try to consume news pretty quickly within an hour over coffee. I don't spend all day on it. I think you get worn out, especially by Twitter. And sitting on there, I may look again if I'm following something and it's a developing story. How do I deal with voyeurism in news? Voyeurism in news. I'm not sure what the question is, actually. I think, what is the question exactly? Pablo's saying some ways he misses commuting because he doesn't have all the time to listen to the morning news. I agree with you, because I always listen to this one show in London called LBC, and it's a talk show and it's a phone-in show. They have good hosts. And I mean, I tend to know what their politics are. Some of them are left, some of them are right, some of them are pro-government here, and some of them are absolutely against them, pro-Brexit, against Brexit. But they have some really good guests, and I think radio is just one of those, great mediums still, where you have time to talk about things, a little bit like HAPS now for me, where I get a chance to, talk about things that I would never have a chance to talk about. So I think that's really cool. So to recap, kind of just the idea of this. I'm now going 12 minutes, but I didn't mean to go that long. But at the same time, it's really helpful to, I think about how you want to consume news, what you consume, and have a broad spectrum to be a good news consumer. Be critical. Think of who's writing it. Are they politically biased? Be open to different views. I've said that now 5 different times, but I think it's really important. And don't just sign on to this echo chamber of people that you like. But again, good cross-section of newspapers in the morning, listen to some morning television, listen to some radio, and then circle around to publications that give you longer, in-depth stories, like the Atlantic, for instance, I think, on this whole story about who Trump is and what his values are. And I think it's a tremendous story that they ran, and I think it gives you a lot of perspective about who that man is. If you choose to disbelieve it, you can do that. So I only meant, how does one deal with news that only looks for sensational breaking news? Well, I mean, there's a lot of that, right? So if something's trending, even cable news now will go and they'll air the breaking story, and they may not be airing things that are more important. They may air a car chase in Los Angeles rather than focusing on an arms agreement. And I'm using that as an example because that happened to me when I worked for an American news station where we had a major arms agreement limiting nuclear weapons between Russia and America. And we were bumped because it was a car chase. And they had cool video. And as a correspondent, you have to put up with that. And then you think, okay, well, I'm not going to get on this hour. Hopefully I'll get it on the next hour, the next 2 hours. And then you start to pressure your foreign assignment desk and say, come on, guys, get real. I mean, what you're airing is not important. We still have to cover news. So why do I think comedians Trevor Noah, John Oliver, Jon Stewart are better at conveying news than traditional journalists? I guess maybe because people are listening, because they want to laugh. And I think maybe, Jon Stewart was great, right? And I think you're open to have a laugh about it. And I think not everything is deadly serious and pitting the left and the right. And sometimes, even when he's making fun of somebody, you can still appreciate who he's making fun of. But I think people don't want to be too serious all the time, and they want to have a laugh. And maybe because they watch those programs, they're open. And I think a lot of people now watching mainstream news are closed. because you have even the president saying it's fake news, don't watch CNN or don't watch this. And so people begin to get allergic and suspicion of mainstream news outlets, which I think is a tragedy, because I think most mainstream news outlets and most mainstream journalists are decent and they do a good job and they have ethics and morality and they try to cover the story the best they can. Britain is having its oceans and fishing grounds leveraged by the EU, but they tell Europe different. So are we frowned? So we are frowned upon as usual. I don't think there's a question in that one, but I think right now the whole debate about Brexit is about to split open, and I'm going to do something on that on HAPS later on this week, where we'll be talking about what's happening with Brexit and Britain's desire to leave the EU but have access to the full market. It doesn't want to apply any of the European standards to its goods and services. It wants its fisheries. It wants to close its borders so it won't allow free movement, but it wants to have all the benefits of being part of the EU. So it's leaving the EU, but it doesn't want to leave the EU. And I think Britain's position is not going to hold, and they're not going to be able to deliver a Brexit deal, and that's going to be an economic disaster here. But there's another question. Do you find the ruling class relationship with the mainstream media growing more recently, or has that been like this for a long time? People with money own big news organizations, and it's always been that way. And some of them, that's that critical eye you have when you're reading news. Who owns it? Are they a big supporter of the Conservative Party? Are they, in Britain, for instance, are they a big supporter of the Republicans? Or so you need to know that they have influence, like Rupert Murdoch does on Fox News. They're going to have influence on their publications, and what they read and what they headline and how they headline it is really important. So, yeah, I mean, ownership is a big deal. And I think the more you read news, there's a basic set of facts. And then after that, there's the editorial opinion. And I think you should be able to dissect the two of them. And you should be able to say, well, that's the story. I get that. But the headline and the way they torqued it, whoever that, whatever that publication may be, you should be able to recognize that. And there are certain publications I just won't read anymore because it's always torqued. But you should also be able to understand the subtle part of that. But great answers, Dana. Thank you. Based on your geopolitical knowledge of the world, who is the next superpower that will conquer the earth? Wow, that's a biggie. I don't know. I think the United States is a military superpower, and I think that China is rivaling it for economic superiority, and obviously it's behind China. It's between China and America right now. But China has a long way to go, and I think the U.S. is still that great nation, that great economy. So anyway, I don't want to get into geopolitics, but I want you to go and read them now tomorrow morning in your coffee, and based on a few rules of how you consume news, I was hoping that this might help you by telling you what I think and what I do. And I'm sure you have your own habits and all that. So thank you, guys. And please, excuse me for my coughing today, please watch Backstory with Dana Lewis podcast. There's lots of international stuff in there, from what's happening with the race relations in America and crime and policing, to Lebanon, to Belarus, to Russia and the poisoning of Alexei Navalny, to Beirut and how they're going to rebuild. Who inspired me to go into journalism? I think that I was inspired by my father, who was a radio reporter, and then in Canada. And then my sister, I have three sisters, they all became journalists. So we all kind of fell into it. But I really felt a pull towards criminal law, and maybe being a prosecutor or a crown attorney, as we call it in Canada, But in the end, I think journalism allowed me to take up the torch, and protect people and speak for little people, because that's what I care about, not speaking for government or speaking for the political view of the day. I think it's important that people who don't have a voice get a voice from journalists, and that's what we're supposed to be doing. Anyway, good to talk to you guys. I'm sure you'll go and listen to the podcast now.